are live talking about the silence in the library.
And
Two
I'm
part.
both glad and disappointed that there's like half as many of us here as we'd initially planned. Because on the one hand, I think it would be really fun to talk about this episode with like 8 or 9 people, but at the
Yeah.
same time, we'd be here for 2 hours.
So-
That said, speaking of Eden, like before we started recording, we were talking about how often we go back to this episode. Daniel, you mentioned that you don't actually revisit this one a lot.
It's nothing against this story per se. It's just that I never really have the inclination to turn on. I think like the first time I did my watch through of Doctor Who of Tennant's era was like the only time I really saw it. May have rewatched it again. It's hard to tell because I don't tend to do like mass rewatches where I go back and forth with Doctor Who. I just pick in a story I like and throw it on.
Yeah, and Lucy, you said you're in a sort of similar place with it?
No, I actually rewatch it all the time.
Oh, okay. So that's closer to mine because I don't really think about it this way, but like I don't rewatch Doctor Who episodes very often because I find that they stick in my memory pretty well and I don't feel the need to go back. I can just be like, I remember that episode. But this one, I find myself going back to a lot out of necessity or just like not even thinking about it. I will always remember that like for one of her birthdays, Eden had a bunch of her friends over who were like complete virgins to Doctor Who and had no idea about any of it. And this was back when the show was on Netflix. We just put on this two-parter, and it was like a whole screening just in our living room. It was great. And I think we hooked everyone onto the show with these 2 episodes.
Yeah, even before I became like a big on Doctor Who fan, like I was always mixed on the show because, like I said, I would find an episode I like. This episode be one of the episodes I really like, and then there'd be a bunch I didn't like, so I'd fall out of it and come off and took over. But this is one of those episodes where I always just go back to that I really like it, and I feel like it's kind of the start of the Moffat era because it has the Rip storyline that continues through it.
Yeah, like I think I said before it started, and I think, again, I'd have to look to confirm this, but from what I heard, this is the story that Moffat wrote after he found out he was going to be a head writer. And you can tell with a lot of elements he threw in, especially the River Song thing, I think is the most obvious element of it, that he was setting up for his own run. So there's a lot of Moffatisms in this script.
The speech River gives foreshadows the Pandorica opens when she says armies have turned around at the mention of his name. Sort of got Series 5 in mind at this stage.
She also name checks the crash of the Byzantium, which is the setting for the Angels two-parter, which is where she next shows up.
That he likes to play with the tropes, the idea of the shadow being something that's based on your perception of what's happening. That's something he plays with a lot. The Doctor defeating a villain by telling him how awesome he is. That comes up a few times in his run.
Maybe a little too many times.
Don't get me wrong. I'm the Doctor and you're the world's biggest library. Look me up. It's one of my favorite moments from Tennant. But yeah, he does that a lot.
The great thing about it here is how kind of understated it is. Like, it's not a huge thing. It's a thing that he does pretty quickly on the fly to buy himself some time.
Exactly telling him, and it's just to get the monster away so he can stop and figure out what the issue is. The funny thing is, I think the only problem I have with it is that there's a lot of ideas being played here, and even with for a two-parter, it can be a bit jumbled with everything he's kind of juggling here, which again is another thing that comes up a lot in Moffat scripts. So it's a very Stephen Moffat story, and I really enjoy it. The stuff with the girl and Dr. Moon, and then Donna gets her own subplot into that episode, and we have to play with the other team and with River and setting that up. And I don't think it like crushes under that weight because it's a very solid story, but dealing with a lot, and it just kind of flips back and forth between them. My only real complaint beyond that, I think the story is pretty great.
Obviously, we all have a lot to say about River, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about her. I feel like maybe this story doesn't even get as much credit as it deserves because I feel like the stuff with the library story, the Donna being stuck in the Cal system, all of that is really, really great stuff on its own. This is a really good, compelling story if you take River Song out of it, and I feel like a lot of that gets lost because when people talk about this episode, it's always the River stuff.
Yeah.
As I mentioned with the Angels two-parter, that's the next time she shows up. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe I'm the only one out of the 4 of us who starts watching this show with the Moffat era.
My first episode was Planet of the Ood, so it's pretty close
to
the Moffat era.
Mine's kind of a funny story. This is when Series 6 was aired, so this is nearly 10 years ago. My friends were huge fans of Doctor Who, and they're always trying to get me into it. And I was like, look, this is a series with like nearly 50 years of history now. If I get into it, I will severely get into it and want to know every single detail and annoy every single person I knew. So my friend gave me a hard drive of Matt Smith's first series, and I was like, look, it's here. I might as well try it, and here we are today.
So then Daniel and I are actually in the same boat, because what I find interesting is, as someone whose first exposure to this show is Flesh and Stone, Eleven and Amy and River in the middle of an adventure, I can't come to this one with the perspective of someone being introduced to River through this episode. Yeah. Like, I know we get more of her afterward. I've already seen it. I'm envious of people who get to watch through this show for the first time and see this character and be like, what is the deal there? And then get the gratification of, she's actually coming back.
What was interesting is when I first watched this is that I didn't think she was coming back. I assumed this was one thing they were going to do where They did the same thing in A Good Man Goes to War with Lorna. I thought it was going to be a similar deal with that, where they would just introduce a character who meets the Doctor in the future. And I thought it was going to be far, far, far into the future, and then we'd never see her again. Because I did not expect her to come back 5 episodes into the next Doctor's run. But then again, I was a kid at the time, so I didn't realise, the writer of this episode is taking over the show. So I didn't really suspect that she would come back, so it was quite a big shock when they showed her in the next time trailer for Victory of the Daleks.
The Minister of War name drop in the Lake 2 part, and that never really comes up again. So Doctor Who has done that before, where it just kind of randomly introduces stuff about the Doctor's life that we haven't seen. So it's not an unreasonable conclusion to come to.
And I think it would be really interesting because, again, part of that not being able to approach it from that perspective, on the one hand, I think if you take this episode in a vacuum and never watch another River Song story, her role is still really impactful and she's still a really cool character who leaves an impression. But at the same time, I can't help but wonder, like, do we think what we end up doing with River later on, like when she does come back and all that stuff, and the fact that we sent her like a whole season-long story arc around her, does that add to the impact of this pair of episodes, or does it kind of detract from it? Well, because I feel like, on one hand, I care more about River because I've gotten to see more of her, but at the same time, I had this thing with this viewing that I hadn't really had before with these 2 episodes, where it's like, River really does feel like a supporting character who's kind of off to the side when the scene isn't about her.
I watched this long before I was like a Who fan and stuff. I really enjoyed the whole dilemma with her. I thought she was a really good character. I didn't know she was going to come back or really care, because like I said, it's one of those shows where like I find an episode I really like and then I just fall off for it for like a year. But I don't know, just everything about this episode always stood out for me and worked. So I just think her character worked as well, and the ending always gets to me. And I do think, though, having all the stuff that came afterwards does add on to me, because this is the end of her story, even though it's still the beginning, and I like that. To see her ending right at the beginning, it's just so heartbreaking. And
well, it's the end of her story, so long as we ignore the name of the Doctor, which I'm comfortable doing personally.
Oh,
that's like the episodes in the series.
I hated what we did with her there. Like, the whole crux of her character is we get to spend time with this person after we've seen them die. And, like, yes, she's living this, like, idyllic life and she gets a happy ending and everyone lives, but there is still the element of tragedy, which is, like, as of this moment for her, her relationship with the Doctor is over. But then in the name of the Doctor, it's just like, no, she could just kind of appear in his head whenever.
I just don't think they were ever consistent with that, because in Day of the Moon, they 100% sure in that story, they hint that the Doctor and River are meeting in the opposite orders.
It's a broad sense. Like, they say opposite, but it's never, like, directly opposite. The reason that they have to compare diaries is because, like, their first is their last, and their last is their first. But in between that, it's scattered all over the place.
But then suddenly,
they're back
the Angels
to front.
take Manhattan. It's after the meetings, like Flesh and Stone and everything. And
I don't think we're meant to take it as literally as possible, like they're going in, like, straight up straight lines opposite directions. It's just that one of them has the first time and one of them has the last time, and that's switched. And in between those 2 things, they're just kind of bouncing all over the place.
I mean, I'd say if that was his intention, though, you shouldn't actually write a line of dialogue which suggests that they're meeting in the opposite order.
I think the reason why they say that is because, like Nicholas says, one will meet them at the end and one will meet them at the beginning, and that's why they did that. Personally, the name of doctor thing, I'm fine with the scene with the goodbye because Matt is basically truly her husband, let's be honest here. And it feels a bit awkward her saying goodbye to 10 or ending it completely with 12.
Well, I mean, ending it with 12 is what we do.
I know. But never having official goodbye with 11, her main man, is what I'm getting at.
And I like the Husbands of River Song, but rewatching these 2 episodes, I had this thought, which is, I haven't gone back to Husbands of River Song in a while. I'm not sure if I'm remembering it completely right, but we end that story, I'm fairly certain, with like, she knows that something real bad is going to happen after that date.
She does, but she doesn't know what exactly is going to happen. She just knows this is her and the doctor's last meeting. I watched this recently. It's a cheat, but it's kind of done pretty decently well.
It's really well executed in that story, so I don't have too much of a problem with it. I do think it contradicts with this one, though, because you definitely get the sense coming into this story that she does not know that something like cataclysmically bad is going to happen.
She thinks it's another casual meeting. And especially because of, I do really like the ending of Husbands of River Song, but the way they spend so long together, like 20 years or something, and she has that hint that she knows something bad is going to happen. It's somewhat of a retcon because it's all implied. It doesn't really gel as well with their meeting in this place in the library.
It could be that she had false hope that, I've met the doctor again. Like, it's never stated anywhere that when she meets the doctor again, that is the moment when she dies. It's more that, this is the last time her and the doctor will meet each other, and it's only legend. And 12's doctor says to her, spoilers, it might not be true. So I don't think it necessarily takes away from this episode or makes it make less sense.
Yeah, and also you have to consider that this is like her 20 years after that episode in the Husbands of River Song.
True.
Do you feel a bit weird defending the River Song storyline? Because in general, I actually dislike it. I don't like how it's handled in season 5.
I think this is
in season 5 and 6. I don't like how it's handled, but I do like River's first story and her last story. Weirdly,
so far we've only talked about episodes involving her that I've liked. So series 6 is really where we get a bunch of episodes with her that I'm not a fan of.
Jump the shark.
I definitely think this is the best she is used. Either this or Husband's probably one of Alex Kingston's best performance in the role. I like how she's a lot more subdued in this role, in this part than she is later on. I like the fact that the implication is that she is older than she was when she meets him the last time, so she's a little less impulsive. She's still flirtatious, but she's not as overt as she is in Series 5 or Series 6. She seems a lot more in control.
I mean, she almost seems like a bit of a different character in the Matt Smith era, which I suppose makes sense because she's younger, but it was a bit of a leap at the time, going from how she was in this story to Time of Angels.
It works if you think of all the other episodes as like the midpoint between this and the complete caricature that she is in Let's Kill Hitler.
Let's not talk about that episode.
I like that
or any
episode, but I understand people's problem with it. Like I said, I think it's good ideas with bad execution, but we'll get to that. But my thing about River, the main reason I like her, she reminds me a lot of like a very feisty female Captain Jack. I honestly, if I'm gonna be honest, she is probably one of my favorite characters from this show, so I'm a bit biased there. So there we go.
It's very divisive. She seems to elicit either complete love or complete hate, kind of like Clara.
Clara has more hate, but River is like right down the middle. Half the fan base loves her. The fan base thinks she's the worst thing to happen to humanity.
I never hated her.
Well, I was on the hate side, but Husbands of River Song did kind of redeem her for me a bit, really.
Yeah, I never really overtly hated her. I will say this is the best use of the character, and I do have a lot of issues with where her character goes, but I think it's better to save them for when we're actually talking about the episodes she appears in. Like,
it's happening already. I knew this would happen. We've got a whole other 2 episodes of content around River to talk about.
You got a lot to edit when this is finished.
Oh no, I'm not saying get rid of any of this. I think this is all great discussion, but I don't want us to like get too far off from this pair of episodes.
Yeah, I can go on for like an hour live. I still think she's great, or her storyline is great, even if it doesn't. The execution isn't always there.
Just to go back with the whole thing I was saying about it being kind of a bit muddled in how many ideas there are. One of my favorite things about the story is Donna's subplot in the second part, and she has like such an emotionally devastating ending for that little story of hers. And it was only until I was rewatching this with Brian, a mutual friend of ours, that he pointed out that like it doesn't really have a lot to do with the actual plot going forward, outside of expanding on where everyone in the library went. And I was like, that's actually a really good point.
The Donna subplot is an interesting idea, but for me, I think this is a rather unpopular opinion, but for me, it just really detracts from what the drama in the second episode, because it's just so clearly alternate reality, and there's no real suspense as to like, oh, which world is real.
I don't think that's the point.
I think the drama is more about how it's affecting this character we like, and eventually the ball dropping of her realizing this perfect idyllic life which she's dreamed of falling apart. And I think that's where the tension lies, not so much us not knowing.
I get the point of it that said, it seems to me like an idea that could have been used for an episode in itself, but it seems thrown into this one. I think that's a problem Moffat has a lot in some of his stories.
I will say that, like, yeah, their whole idyllic world thing actually sets up the ending as well. So I guess that's the purpose for it being in the plot. It does take up a lot of the story.
I disagree that it detracts from the story, and I think it serves a couple of purposes.
Yeah.
You're right, Daniel. It sets up the ending so that we can have the Everybody Lives ending. It tells us things about Donna, like when we get to the end, and like Donna's like, he's handsome, he adores me, and he barely speaks a word. What does that say about me? And the doctor's like, everything. Oh, I mean nothing. Nothing is what I meant to say. And like, that's true. What we see of Donna there tells us a lot about her and her values and what she wants in a life as a character. And the third thing I think it does is that it does more to endear us to and humanize Cal, because us seeing the kind of life that the people who she puts in the simulation, us seeing what they go through, it makes her seem even more sympathetic. As opposed to, like, imagine we never find out what the people who got saved are going through. We should know what those people are experiencing. And us seeing that they have, like, this kind of happy lifestyle, it tells us that Cal, the computer, really is, they're a well-intentioned character deserving that much more of our sympathies. Instead of just, oh, feel sorry for them because they're a little girl. No, we've seen what they have planned for people, and they really do have people's best interests at heart.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And again, it does set up where everyone is in the library, where they all disappear to. So it has way more of a thematic and emotional purpose than a strict plot one. That I don't think that detracts from its emotional impact. Like I said, it's one of my favorite things in the story. The two-parter juggled a lot, where I was thinking of stuff like the Marvel's two-parter in Series 1.
Empty Child and the Dr. Dance.
Yeah,
we just posted the video for that one like 2 hours ago.
Oh, cool. The one thing I really like about that is that the Captain Jack stuff really flows seamlessly into the plot with the gas mask kids, and those kind of merge really well together.
It's a really interesting structure. And like, I don't disagree with Rob when I say that Moffat has a problem of taking ideas and concepts that could be a whole episode unto themselves and like putting them in a few minutes of a different episode. That's a thing that he does a lot. I don't think that's what this is. This is a very interesting sort of approach to structure that this show doesn't do a lot, because we have an A plot and a B plot. The A plot is the Vashta Narada. The B plot is the Donna stuff. The B plot with Donna does not start until the second part. So we have like one A plot taking us through the whole first episode, which is the mystery of the Vashta Narada and like how are we going to deal with the shadows. Donna gets sent to the TARDIS. It doesn't work. We end on a cliffhanger, and then we open part 2 with, beginning plot B branching out from part A, and then the two of them converge back together at the end. I think that really works. But it does create this kind of thing where we're used to this show in particular doing either the Empty Child, Dr. Dance's thing, where it's like we set up our plot points in part A, and all of those things carry through to part B, or we do something with like the two-parters in Series 9, where it's like some elements and characters will carry between the two parts, but the two parts themselves will pretty like clearly differentiate between like the plot and the goals and the genre even and the setting. Before the Flood and the one with me, a shielder.
Really well in that.
Yeah. So we're used to this show doing one of those two approaches, where it's one plot for 2 episodes or 2 connected plots, one in one episode and one in the other. It's very rare that we get one plot in one episode that then becomes two plots in the second episode that come back together at the end.
I think it's just, for me, the issue is like an awkward structure, which takes me out of it. I don't necessarily disagree that it's important to the story, but the second episode for me just feels significantly weaker than the second one. It's not a popular opinion because this is a really highly regarded story. But even though I am very positive towards the story, like when I watch it, I really like it. But the second episode to me just isn't as tight as the first one, because it's just a bit of a jumble trying to juggle too many different things. It doesn't feel structurally smooth. That's really my major issue with the story. I also think the Vashta Narada stuff, well, you were talking about how you liked the scene with the doctor just telling the Vashta Narada to go away, and they do. It doesn't really work for me, like, in the same way as others do, because to me, when I watch it, it feels like a way to get the Vashta Narada out of the story so he can send off River Song, and then they just never reappear again, and it just feels to me like a bit of a cop-out. I know it's great. David Tennant absolutely kills that scene, and he's terrific in it, but it just doesn't click for me like it does with others. I mean, I understand it's the point of Moffat's vision of the Doctor as someone who's really dangerous and has a big message about him, but yeah, to me, it just kind of added to the sense of the story kind of lacking a bit of focus. I don't know if you agree with that.
The way I think about it is that, like, you're right, at a certain point, we do have to just look at the Vashta Narada and say, you've served your purpose as a threat and we need to get you out of the story. They're like, you've got one day, we'll give you this amount of time to get all the people back out of the computer, and then you've got to get them off the planet. Given the way that this show tends to end episodes, it's like the Doctor and Donna have done their business, it's time for them to get out. I think in part it's like, yeah, we send off River Song because that's the more emotionally impactful ending, but it's also just like, all we would do for closure with the Vashta Narada is have like a scene of exposition where the Doctor is like, you guys gotta get off the planet so the Vashta Narada can have the planet back. I'm perfectly fine just knowing that that happened off screen.
Also, you have to take in consideration, even though we use them as something for the episode they have a problem for, they're not actually the bad guys. They're just thinking they're protecting their forests, and they're looking at us as the invaders. And once the Doctor puts fear into them and say, hey, let me fix this, I know what I'm doing, they're just like, all right, you got one day.
I like that it's not even that, though, because that in and of itself could be a little tropey. I like that on some level it's like, yeah, we came into their forest and we made it into a library, but it's like, it's not even that they're mad about that, because like they're still there. They're not trying to protect anything. Really, their stance is just like, we are predators. Prey walked into our home, basically. You want us to not eat them?
I like them using the spacesuits to kind of get across their kind of huge threat, even though they're very similar to that monster in Scooby-Doo. I think it's really creepy, especially when you see the skulls pop out of the space helmets. That's really cool.
What they do with it is they sort of make it sort of funny, but also kind of creepy, like with the way they just repeat the man's last words. I remember not being scared of them as a kid. I remember just kind of laughing at the fact that the monster chasing them was repeating, "Hey, you turn out the lights," which was just like, I don't know if it works or not. I do remember enjoying it. Like, the cliffhanger is very effective, I think, because of the way they're trapped, and all you can hear in the background is just, "Hey, you turn out the lights," and at the same time, Donna Noble has been saved. It's just like tension from both sides.
Another one of my favorite Moffat tropes, having a really awesome, amazing cliffhanger that gets resolved in a very lame way. Oh my god, the Doctor's trapped in a corner. What's he going to do? Open a door in the right and run.
Russell T Davies had that problem too, like Utopia's cliffhanger being solved by, Captain Jack's teleport in The Sound of Drums. I mean, just as far as Moffat tropes go, I think as well, the trope of the Vashta Narada repeating the victim's last words was very similar, I thought, to Angel Bob in Flesh and Stone.
Brianna, actually, while we were watching it, she made that comparison. I can sort of see it, with the exception of Anita. Because Anita is the one exception where they actually use the dead person's voice to convey their own thoughts. That's what the angels do. With the other ones, the Vashta Narada aren't even doing anything. It's just the technology of the ghosts.
Yeah.
Like, for all intents and purposes, the Vashta Narada are silent, but it's the technology attached to the suits that's keeping their last words going on in a loop.
The last scene with them when they tell.
That's what I mean, Anita.
Another Moffat trope, he reuses the empty child thing a lot, where it was like, the tape has run out, but we can still hear the voice. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They do that in this one with "We should go, Doctor." Like you just think, "Oh my God, the guy behind him is just saying, you know, Doctor, come on." But then eventually you sort of realize, oh, okay, he's been taken over by the Vashnarada. So yeah, I think that's always quite effective because I never suspect it, even though it's like something that he reuses a lot. So I think that's one of his more effective ones because he seems to always get me with that.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. He uses it a lot. I think he uses it in the Girl in the Fireplace too, because you hear the ticking in the background. He goes, "If the clock's broken, what's the ticking?"
Yeah, I think that is kind of pointed out a bit earlier before you even see the broken clock. So it's not really as effective as the other ones. It's in that one.
I really like. There's 5 people in this room, right? Yeah. So why are there 6?
Yeah, that was another one. Yeah. Hey, who turned out the lights?
Saying, "Hey, who turned out the lights?" has proven to be the quickest, easiest way to scare my mom after watching these episodes.
But can we talk about how disturbing that really is? You're basically having the last thought of someone's brain being repeated over and over again.
Disturbing in concept. After this episode aired, I used to literally just walk into my brother's room all the time and just go, "Hey, who turned out the lights?" That's all I could remember from this episode.
It's disturbing on multiple levels. I feel dumb that I don't remember this detail, but I'm pretty sure they didn't develop it that way on purpose. Like, the purpose of that technology is not to let you hear people's last words. It's just kind of something that happened, and they never fixed it. Disturbing on the level of, like, it's an invasion of privacy, as, like, someone's last thoughts. You'd never think is something that you'd worry about, like, being exposed to, and, like, do you feel right even hearing that? But it's also disturbing on the level of, like, it's kind of a neat 2-in-1 thing, where the Vashta-Narada get to be both this really cool abstract concept of like creepy flesh-eating shadows, and they also get to be represented by this really iconic design of the skull and the spacesuit. And that's a constant reminder along with the voice of like, these things are carrying around walking corpses. These are dead bodies that are chasing you. And like the thing about the repeating phrases is like the reason it goes on a loop like that is that that's representative of brain death pretty much. Of like, it's that last like 0.01% of your brain that's still functioning and can technically be called alive, but you are a dead person, and we are constantly being reminded of your voice. That's really creepy.
I do think the best use of that concept doesn't actually even involve the Vashta-Narada, because in episode 1, Miss Evangelista dies, and I think this is the best scene in the story by a distance, where she's sort of still talking to Donna, and she sort of says in front of everybody, the others are making fun of her, introduces to the concept of the ghost, and they have her repeat her last words. It's a powerful scene, I think. Even though it doesn't have a great amount to do with the overall plot, it's a very strong scene, and I think it's acted really well. Probably my favorite part of the story, because it's very creepy, and it's also very emotional.
Ice cream. As Brianna pointed out, it sounds like ice cream. It's kind of funny in a disturbing way, where it's like, here's this character that everyone was calling stupid, and like her last thought is this really childish, simple thing. And yet at the same time, that's yet another reminder of like, your brain goes to very simple things, maybe from your childhood, when the lights are starting to go out. That's like another sign of your brain is gone. You're dead.
About the character of Miss Evangelista, though, I'm not sure if I even agree with this. I don't know if any of you agree with it, but I've seen some commenters criticize this story for how part 2 sort of presents her as being deformed, but that means that she's now smart, when in the first episode she was really like pretty but also stupid. I've seen some people criticize that as Moffat trying to get across the message that only
No.
Only women can be smart, but I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't think that's what he was going for. I'm just wondering what you lot thought about that.
What he is going for is something that I take issue with. It's a strong word, but like, people who are saying that are being dumb, because the episode is by no means conflating the fact that she's suddenly ugly with the sudden intelligence. She straight up says, this isn't even my real body. And like, I love Donna's response, like, this isn't my real body. I've been dieting. We've been converted to ones and zeros. I'm pretty sure that like my IQ just got like mixed up in the transition from my physical body to this representation of me. I happened to become smarter as I also happened to be made physically deformed. What she says is, I have the 2 qualities needed to see absolute truth. I'm brilliant and unloved. I think that's one of Moffat's, like, attempting to be too clever by half and accidentally coming out really problematic or stupid bits. And thankfully that there's not a lot of that in these 2 episodes, but that's something that Moffat has where he tries a little bit too hard to make like clever, catchy sort of turns of phrase or like little bite-sized nuggets of ideas. And that notion, I don't know if I agree with that. Like the idea that in order to be objectively the most like observant, the most correct person, you have to be intelligent, but you also can't be attached to anyone emotionally. That's I don't know how I feel about that.
I keep on forgetting how great Carter Tate is in this show. Like, I think because you mentioned that scene with her and her crying over finding the dead girl and her breaking down, that scene contrasting with River's death. And the music's so good in that moment too.
And Tate came back in 2008. Everybody was like, she's going to be the worst companion ever.
Yeah.
She's going to be this like amazing actress. Everybody was just completely shocked. I don't understand it.
I wasn't a huge fan of The Runaway Bride. I didn't really like Donna in that, but she grew up to be one of my favorite companions of the entire show.
I didn't like her comedy show. I thought the Catherine Tate show was just really not funny.
Considering how big she was in England in 2008, it seems like a stunt casting, but it works so naturally.
Yeah.
I'm glad, actually, at that stage that I was not watching the show as it was airing, because I just know that at that age, I would have been one of those people. I would have had that reaction had I been introduced to her at The Runaway Bride at that age. At this age, having recently revisited The Runaway Bride and thinking that she's great even in that story, I don't think I would have had that reservation going through the show. Like, I would have been excited. Like, more Donna? Yes, please.
Good in The Runaway Bride too. Like, she starts off kind of similar to her characters from her comedy shows, but for the rest of it, she kind of gets to act more seriously, and she's very good in that role. Not that she's not good at the comedy as well, but it's just like she delivered more than what was expected of her.
As we've mentioned in previous videos, she and David Tennant have excellent chemistry, which you can see more of on Disney's DuckTales, available now on Disney XD.
I would say they don't interact as much, which is a shame. I really want them to interact more, but yeah, I really love it.
Didn't they also do a Shakespeare play together?
Yes.
I'm sure they did. They were on the Graham Norton show.
They are friends. They are really good friends in real life, so I think they interact a lot. They just work a lot together.
I promise I'm not going to use every Donna episode as an excuse to gush about DuckTales. It relates to a strength of hers in all of these episodes, but this one especially, which is that she's got a great range. She does this great thing of how quickly and how naturally she can go from the comedy to the pathos. In DuckTales, that takes the form of her playing a villain, so there will be scenes that are like genuinely tense, and like, you know, for a show aimed at children, she is kind of an imposing, threatening character, but she's also still injecting that kind of haughty humor into it.
Yeah.
And so there's really nothing that she says that isn't kind of funny, but even when she's being kind of scary and threatening. And in this episode, like you said, Daniel, going from the pathos, she can go from, this isn't my real body, I've been dieting, to, don't say that about my children. My children are not fake. And like earlier with River, I love the bit where it's like, what are you talking about? Are you just talking rubbish? Do you know him or don't you?
It's a very refreshing response.
The "it doesn't do wood" joke is this is a really popular joke with the fandom.
Very inconsistent, because sometimes it does work on wood and they just don't bother to bring it up.
Donald Noble has that library, which is terrifying, and her trying to keep on to her children, which is tragic, and she plays it off perfectly. It's so seamless.
And the fact that they disappear like within the space of a cut is terrifying.
Because Moffat seems to be really interested in death, which is funny because he inverts death a lot in his stories, and the idea of, you know, preservation of this guy trying to preserve something for his granddaughter besmirched on these creatures' lands and stuff like that. I think that was where my mind was going. It's just an interesting way of how it looks at these kind of idea of the preservation of life, death, and, you know, besmirching on his legacy and stuff like that. It's just something I think Nick said offhandedly about the Vath and Arad. I sent this trailer thought off, and I just wanted to get it out there, not really being, you know, not so much antagonistic as you are predators in their space. They are going to attack you. There's no animosity between them. They're just predators. I like that.
There is something to that.
It's a half-baked idea where I wish I had time to figure out what the hell I'm talking about.
I don't think it's a fully formed, like, intentional thing on Moffat's part.
I don't think it was intentional by him. I'd like to probably rewatch the episode on my own time and with that thought in mind.
Because I think what you're talking about is instinct. And, like, Sebastian and Arata are operating on instinct. Cal, like, instinctually, without even really thinking about it, folds all these people into her memory space to save them. Donna, while inside of the simulation, has this instinctual need to feel that it's real, and this instinctual protectiveness of her children, even though they're fake children. There is a consistency there.
And there's the consequences of all that, because all these 40,000 people disappear for years because of this decision. Whether or not it was protecting them or not, it led to a dire consequence and stuff like that.
That's another thing that Brianna brought up that we don't really talk about in the episode, which is like we end it happily and we get them all back into the library and everyone's saved. All of those people, their lives are probably over. I can only hope that they only look like humans and that they're not actually a human species and that they live long, because they've been gone for 100 years. Everyone they know is probably dead.
Controversial thought. The idea of how hopeful and happy the Resolution River song and the other people are has an element of fringe horror. The episode itself explores the idea of the artificiality of this perfect idyllic life, and they give this to River as the happy ending.
We do go out of our way to have her say in dialogue, "This is a good place now." And I think the episode could have maybe been more explicit about this.
Does that mean, like, time no longer skips?
Based on what we're told, the reason that they only have the same kids gone over and over again, and the reason that they keep time skipping, is because they have thousands of people in there. And so if you're going to give thousands of people this idyllic life, you kind of have to cut corners. Now they only have, like, the group of them in there. She can conceivably have a lot more memory space to make the life feel more real and not have to take as many shortcuts and actually let them do more stuff.
I think that goes back to my whole thing of, like, there's so much plot in this episode that even with two parts, a lot of things kind of left on the wayside and up to your interpretation, or just up to not being explained as clearly as it could be. During issue with Moffat's stories, funnily enough.
That is explained. It is in the dialogue.
Yeah, I'm not saying it isn't.
That's a problem with the episode. It is just, like you're saying, a matter of how much time can they devote to elaborating on certain.
Don't think it's that important, mainly because even when Donna was there, she was happy and stuff. I don't.
Well, she wasn't. She wasn't, Lucy.
She was sort of aware of the time being a bit off. She could sort of sense that something was off.
With time being off the way it is, we're basically seeing her in real time. So it's not like Donna actually got to live like a happy life and be happy for all that time. She has memories of that, maybe, but she got to be happy for about 20 minutes. The 20 minutes that we see her being happy is the extent of time that she was happy in there.
She probably would have just been happy, though, if it just kept on going, though. That's what I'm getting at. She
probably wouldn't have been able to. They were straining themselves in that system as it was.
I know, but she seemed happy with her husband. Again, she loved her husband. She loved her kids. It seemed like she wasn't, like, living a bad life.
I mean, the tragic part is the husband actually was real, and they
Another thing I heard, as little sense as this would have made, and again, I don't know if this is true or not, I haven't verified it. Russell T Davies did want to bring him back to be the one who marries Donna in the end of time, but they couldn't get the actor.
It wouldn't have made any sense to find a way to the past, but I don't care. It would have made me so happy.
It would have made sense if it was an alternate universe, but it isn't.
One thing about the river thing, it reminds me of that quote, hell is being stuck with your friends. And that's basically what they give her. She's stuck with all these people she hung on with for all of eternity and her only company, which, again, adds more to the fringe horror if you think too much about it. Thought of this actually when you mentioned earlier, Rob, about you not being as into Donna's subplot as the rest of the fandom seems to be. The one thing I will say, the timing of it is really weird, because this is a couple of episodes before Turn Left and the finale, where a lot of happens to Donna, and it's way more intense. I brought this up when we were talking about Unicorn the Wasp, because the show gets really dark from here on out. For
Donna especially, things very quickly stop being fun for her.
Also, I just realized talking about this, for the next 9 episodes, Russell T Davies is a writer in every single one of them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
As far as things stopping being fun for Donna, I think that actually was like kind of her second episode, if you think about it. Fires of Pompeii, Planet of the Apes, she deals with like some really heavy stuff in those ones. So
True.
Heavy stuff in the season for her. There is one thing I do want to mention. I don't know if you guys had any of this. I wanted to see if it bothered you. There's one thing that does kind of bug me in this episode is how much they kind of reinforce that River is his future wife. I feel like they do it a bit too much and it gets a bit on my nerves.
I don't think they do it at all.
You guys fight like old married couple. Oh, I know him from the future.
A married couple line is really all there is.
At the time of Angels, and Amy asked if she was his future wife, I was actually kind of surprised because I couldn't remember a specific instance if they hinted at that. But I guess the whole married couple line does hint at that, so you are kind of right. But that's the only instance I can remember.
The idea of it when he says the only time I could tell somebody about my name, that's more subtle than the whole you fight like a married couple thing.
And it's really weird because you get the sense that that's definitely a line that Moffat wrote without really thinking through where he was going to take that. He doesn't say there's only one time I would tell somebody my name. He says there's only one time I could. It's a very specific word choice, and
they never actually reveal, do they, when the Doctor told River his name, apart from one throwaway line later where River says, "Oh, I made him tell me."
The implication is he has to be married, and which is to reveal that. The weird implication is that, they have to be really close together for him to reveal it.
The name thing is another one of those things that works in the context of this episode, is just building on the mystery.
Yeah.
And like, we could get an answer to that. We could never get an answer to that.
Wedding of River Song supposedly gave us an answer to that.
I will say, I don't think the implication is that he had to have married her to reveal it, but more that he had to be very, very close to somebody before he could reveal it. I thought that was the implication they gave.
I felt like it was completely arbitrary. Right. You definitely get the sense that he hadn't thought that hard about it when he made these two episodes.
I get the sense of that the whole River Song arc.
It's entirely possible. He did not come up with a lot of the stuff he did.
Are you telling me that Mel's in Let's Kill Hitler was planned from the start?
Definitely.
I mean, she never appears at all, but then, she doesn't appear at Amy and Rory's wedding because she doesn't do weddings.
It would have worked perfectly fine if she just showed up in one other episode.
A lot of things that we're talking about is retroactively contradicting things are not working as well. We wouldn't have these problems if what Rob had suggested was maybe a possibility was actually what happened, which is that this is just a weird one-off.
I mean, that's what I remember thinking when I was like 10, so maybe my opinions evolved over time.
It does kind of hurt this one a little bit, but I don't know. I think it's got a lot of surprising thematic strength. It's some really cool ideas in there. I love the idea that he goes to a library and everything being quiet is the problem. It's a great hook to a mystery. I really love that setup.
I have one line of dialogue that has always bugged me about this episode. Every time I watch it, never ceases. Like the I point and laugh at archaeologists bit feels really out of character for the Doctor.
He repeats it in The Impossible Astronaut, where River calls him a hippie, and then he says archaeologist.
It's really weird.
Like
Moffat.
It just seems like a really weird sort of Moffat
It's like
trope.
having him.
I don't know why.
It's like having him say he hates soldiers when one of his closest friends is literally a brigadier.
Thank you.
Well, they already addressed that in the storyline, though. You know what I mean? They did a whole storyline kind of out of that. Like, in fact, the Third Doctor kind of seemed to hate soldiers apart from the Brigadier, so...
You gotta stop talking about the Doctor's preference toward professions. You always make it weird.
I think this was just trying to be an ego thing with the 10th Doctor, because he does have a big ego in this.
Little thing that I liked, really smartly written, full of, like, keeping track of all the little details. Hey, who turned out the lights guy? Dave. Proper Dave. We actually see him get infected. Like, it never occurred to me until this viewing, but, like, a scene opens with most of the cast on, like, one side of the room, and the Doctor's, like, sonicking the shadow that he's pretty sure the Vashta Nerada are in. Dave's foot is, like, right there, and he's like, Dave, can you move, please? And he moves to join everyone else. That's the Vashta Nerada latching onto him.
Other minor things. There's a green screen effect at the beginning of the episode, and it is the funniest thing. It is so obvious.
Her floating around things. You could argue maybe that's on purpose because she's not actually there, but it still looks weird.
It's always weird to me that the actor who plays Dr. Moon is the general from Resident Evil who gets chopped up into chunklets.
He's the stepdad in Arrow, and Malik has had me watching Arrow for a little while, so I recognize him from that.
He pops up a lot and stuff.
Every time I watch these episodes, I always want to know what that cartoon Abigail is watching in her room is. It looks so weird, and I don't know what it is or how to find out.
I love her switching from an episode of Doctor Who to switching what looks like an episode of Hollyoaks. Because it really does feel like a kid flipping through TVs when they're like homesick or something.
Cartoon you're talking about, I'm sure I've seen it on TV before because I'm English, but I can't remember what it is. I'm frustrated.
Some people have pointed out Doctor Who itself is a TV show. For the bits where she has to interact and like observe the Doctor and Donna and all them, she has to see them in a visual medium. So that's why she's watching TV. It does maybe ring a little bit false with, we put her in a reality where she could have all the books that she'd ever wanted. She loved books. We never see that girl reading. That's a constraint of, we want to have this character observing the other characters and she needs to see them. And like her reading about them would not work as well. But it's like, it's weird that the character who we built the library around, who loves books, we never actually see her.
Aware of how mean. I have a tendency to really rag on child acting, but this continues Doctor Who's tradition of pretty.
I think she was fine.
I should point out, whenever I criticize child acting, I'm not actually criticizing like they're kids. They're just learning. It's usually the director who's at fault. He's not in the episode as much, and she isn't as terrible as the kid from Fear Her.
Kids in the Forest of the Night were a lot worse.
Yes, they were pretty bad.
Yeah, Cal, she has a couple of line reads that I don't think are great, but like for the limited screen time that she's in, she's asked to do a lot.
Yeah.
Like she has to do a lot emotionally, and I don't think she's given a bad performance at all.
Okay, weirdly, I'm one who always loves to crap on child actors, but she's okay. Compared to a lot of child actors in Doctor Who, like that, the ones from In the Forest of Night, one from The Almost People.
Speaking of acting, we mentioned earlier Anita. Her actress is doing something really interesting. I don't know what level of input Moffat has on the actors past the writing stage and the fact that clearly they all like hang out and are friends, but Moffat's scripts seem like they're written with a mind to a very certain kind of performance, and that's true of parts of this episode, but really true of his own era, like once he starts showrunning. Like Matt Smith, later appearances of Alex Kingston and Arthur Darvill and Karen Gillan, they're all doing this very specific kind of acting that's really conducive to like the super glib, again, super clever, everyone's kind of too clever for their own good, everyone has these witty remarks, sort of dialogue that he does. And Anita has that dialogue, but she's delivering it very differently. And this is in part because the character spends a lot of the episode like about to die. She delivers those lines in a very like unsure of herself, very frightened, very vulnerable way while still trying to remain strong. You don't see that kind of performance in episodes written by Moffat a lot.
To be fair, she is kind of dying, so I think it's a bit of a different dynamic.
Yeah, I'm not saying this as a criticism at all. I think that's great.
It definitely is, yeah.
I'm not sure how much say the writers of the episodes have over casting. I'll say the head writer probably has a bit of a say, but like I think it's stuff like Blink, and Carey Mulligan wasn't as huge as she ended up becoming before she was cast, but like she fits that role so well. He must have had someone like, if not her, someone like her in mind when writing that part.
Like, I feel like anybody could have fit the Sally Sparrow role, but I still think Carey Mulligan still does a fantastic job with it. No, I can't think of it as a role that was made specifically for her.
She does fit the part so well. And
yeah, definitely.
Here's something else interesting, like a little tiny thing that was in my notes, like stuff that I'm just picking up on in this viewing, having watched this episode a lot. The conversation where Donna's talking to Miss Evangelista and the thing, and she's like, your children aren't real. Cal is watching that, and she's like, don't tell her, you'll ruin everything. She grabs the remote, presses a button on the remote, and it seems like nothing happens, but that's when Donna's daughter, like her daughter, falls over and scrapes her knee, and she's like, oh, let's get you home and look at that knee. She makes her scrape her knee by pressing the button on the remote to end the conversation.
I don't know how I never noticed that. That's
it's such a good thing.
She's afraid of them leaving that comfort that she's put them in for so long.
Yeah, they also do that with like the books being thrown around in the library.
But that's such a small thing, because, like, obviously you know the children aren't real, but you never think that she can, like, control them to that degree. It's like, oh, one of them fell down and scraped their knee. She made that happen. The snapping of the fingers is so perfect. That's a thing that he will continue to do. but in the purposes of this story, it's so great, and it's a really impactful.
I think it's introduced in this story.
It is.
It's introduced in the story, isn't it? And it becomes a regular thing throughout his era. So that's another thing that indicates he was clearly knew he was becoming showrunner when he wrote this story.
Not even necessarily, because this is another thing where you could end this episode and he never does it again, and him doing it here would still be impactful.
But it is still an introduction to Doctor Who canon, though, that he can open the TARDIS doors with his fingers.
Because he's like, no one can open a TARDIS by snapping their fingers. River's like, the Doctor can. He's like, whatever. And again, me having known that we will get back to River, I'm not even thinking about this, but there's this sense of like, when she dies, the Doctor, and he like uploads her, the Doctor's like, will I ever really see her again? I don't know for sure. And then him snapping his fingers, and he gets this great big smile on his face. And it's this really uplifting note of like, the fact that he can do that and it works means that he is for sure going to see her again, and that she is right about his future.
That's a very good point. I just want to say, I don't know if it was established that only the Doctor can open.
She's being glib. It's probably that like anyone can do it if they try hard enough. When she says the Doctor can do it, that's like, I am the Doctor. Yeah, maybe one day. It's like, my doctor, the person that I know, can do this.
That's another reason why I always say like Matt is her doctor, from just that scene. Like I said, Matt and her are the ones that are the main course of it. So
even though I actually think she worked better with Capaldi, but I mean, they only got one episode together, which really irritates me. So
I think they were both good.
But I prefer Capaldi to Smith, so it's probably just a bias thing. But
I think there's a recurring element of Moffat examining kind of the ideas of the Doctor and his importance or lack thereof within the world itself, and the whole snap of his finger seems like a good indication of where he goes with that, for better or for worse, depending on your opinion of how Moffat writes the Doctor. But it's a nice introduction to the ideas that he brings up throughout his own show.
The snapping the fingers thing I was fine with. It's just when Clara does it in the Day of the Doctor,
That's weird.
So anybody can just snap their fingers and just open the TARDIS doors? I thought it was just the Doctor who can do that.
Briefly talked about this before, but it's really going to come up once we get into his era, is that Moffat seems like pathologically incapable of writing a story that isn't on some level a meta-commentary about the Doctor's place in the universe, his place like within fandom, and the fiction of the show as it exists as a pop cultural thing through the character. He seems incapable of avoiding that. I wanted to say earlier, when you were talking about like this episode as like a thing about death, you could write a thick textbook about Moffat's relationship with the concept of death through episodes of this show, and you can write a probably even bigger textbook about how Moffat is like compelled to use Doctor Who to talk about Doctor Who, and he can't stop himself from doing it.
Well, I kind of like that. It depends on what episode he's exactly writing. But as long as he doesn't go to like, oh, this is a fictional show that you're watching. I do kind of like the concept.
I think it gives a good sort of like meta thematic heft to his episodes, even the less strong ones. But it's just kind of funny how much he can't stop doing it.
I was following his tweets when they were doing the tweet along for Heaven Sent, and he brings up the fact that during Capaldi's era, he tries one experimental episode every one of his series. So Series 8 was Listen. For this one, it was Heaven Sent. And then the 10th one was, I can't remember the name of the episode, but it's the one where he's in the reality. And it's basically like, can the Doctor realize... Extremis, yeah. Can the Doctor realize he's a fictional character? So clearly that was something on his mind, Nick. So
he literally had an episode about the Doctor watching a Doctor Who episode.
Exactly.
To watch a Doctor Who episode and be like, what is this rubbish?
This is another thing that did not occur to me until this viewing, but it's like, out of any singular story or like pair of episodes or whatever across this show, I think this two-parter has the best score of any of them. Like, there are better musical singular tracks in certain episodes, but this one has the most consistent, like, almost every bit of music that's in this pair of episodes is something that I listen to like constantly and I really love.
For me, that would be probably A Christmas Carol or the Series 10 finale.
A Christmas Carol.
But this is definitely up there as far as like consistent scores throughout it. Or Human Nature and the Family of Blood actually is another good one. But The Greatest Story Never Told is definitely a great track. I like the usage of the Doctor's Series 4 theme towards the end. So yeah, you're definitely right on that, where it does have a very consistently good score throughout.
Like I said, one of my favorite uses of music is the bit where River's about to die to save everyone, and
Greatest Story Never Told, right?
Yeah, and Don is about to be removed, and the contrast of the Doctor losing somebody who he has not met yet, and Donna losing somebody she technically does not know, and it's the score so beautiful, bridging these two moments together. It's so good.
That crescendo is so neat.
Yeah.
And like that bit, I think it's still part of The Greatest Story Never Told. It's like they space it out throughout the episode. So like part of it is playing in the scene where the Doctor's like, you don't say saved, you say safe. Like figuring out that they saved them to the hard drive. Part of that track is playing in that scene. It's also great. It's like, it's so good. The episodes that Rob listed as like possible competition, Heaven Sent, A Christmas Carol, those are also really up there.
Even Nature and the Family of Blood as well, I think has really great soundtracks in that one.
That's also up there, but this is like one that comes to my mind is like, oh man, I forget just how consistently I love the tracks that are used in this episode. But yeah, I think these pair of episodes are freaking brilliant. I've like nitpicked them, but the extent to which I've nitpicked them here is all I have possibly bad to say about them. I think it's a freaking masterpiece.
If a problem I have with an episode, and my only problem I have really with the episode, outside of like some data effects, which is nitpicky really, and the ending, which is debatable, is that there's a lot of stuff in here that I want to see more of. That's a great compliment in form of a criticism. I think there's a lot of really cool ideas here. I think River's probably the best she is throughout the entire series. I love what they do with Donna and the Doctor. I love the fact that we don't get Donna's story until the second half, and it's a really big kind of misdirect towards where the story's going to go and stuff like that. So
before I forget, another great line is the transition into that when the Doctor sends it to the TARDIS, where it's like, Donna, let me explain. Teleports her away. That's the way you do it.
Like every Moffat story has about 50 great lines that you could just keep on going on about, because he's just such a great dialogue writer, regardless of how you feel about the plots of his episodes. Even some of the ones I really hate, like Series 6 episodes, there's some fantastic dialogue in those stories.
I always say about people, I say, even in a bad Moffat episode, at least there's a lot of good moments scattered through it.
There's a lot of great, intense, scary atmosphere to it. I loved Vashna Rada as a concept. It's a pity they never came back, but I don't really know what you can do with them after the story. The whole idea of the shadows is really creepy.
Donna's like, they're not on Earth, are they? And it's like, yeah, they're on Earth.
There's a lot of Moffat-y tropes here. It's Moffat tropes done in the best way possible, and it really gets you hyped up for his series, which, depending on your disposition, was either a great success or a rousing disappointment. But I really liked these two-parter, and I really liked it being a kind of dry run to Moffat taking over. So
that's such a big part of this episode, and that like so many elements of it that are like the crux of it in a lot of ways emotionally would go on to become a pretty majorly divisive thing, and that this story still stands up completely in spite of that, I think is it just being really solid. Sure. A lot of the specific tropes that we have talked about here are going to show up more than once later on in less than successful ways. So
I'll explain later.
That's debatable, I will say.
Ironically,
I still think The Curse of Fail, that's the best thing he ever wrote for Doctor Who.
10 out of 10 episodes is the best Doctor, and I will not hear any other arguments.
He's so good. I bribed the architect.
My thoughts on the episode, I think it's pretty great. I think there's a lot of ideas here, but I think they're perfectly fleshed out enough. I never felt like, oh, well, this needs so much more explaining or anything. I feel like this like cinema sin nitpicking level, like they didn't explain it enough.
That wasn't really my issue.
I think everything's explained enough into it. I think it's fleshed out pretty well, honestly, and I really like River. I don't think this is my favorite appearance of her. I like the more flirty Captain Jack kind of River, but overall I think these are pretty almost flawless. I'm not a great fan of the very, very end where they live. I think it would have been better if they just walked away and the last scene was them.
Nope. Hard disagree.
But that's another thing we'll talk about later.
Everybody Lives thing works so well in Dr. Dance's is because it's a huge character moment and it's part of his arc.
I'll let Rob finish off, but I'll just leave it at saying I do not think this episode would work as well if it ended tragically.
The entire Doctor Who fandom absolutely loves this story, and I do really like it. And I love Series 4 as a whole. I very rarely say anything bad about Series 4. It's the best series, the revival, in my opinion. But this story, to me, is a good story that should be a great one. But to me, it just packs too many things in. Not all of them click as well with me as it should. I have very many negative things to say about it, but I do think the second part is a lot weaker than the first. There's some parts of the song storyline that don't completely add up with future stories. The Vac Narada, they are conceptually good, but they don't scare me as much as some other Moffat villains like the Weeping Angels and the Clockwork Androids. I do find the story a bit inconsistent, but it's a good one. Like a lot of Series 4, I do enjoy it. It's very stylish, creepy. It's cleverly written at some points, but I do think, it's a bit jumbled. It's very inconsistent. But overall, it's a good one. It just has a lot going for it.
I'm going to call it there. So, join us at some unspecified point from midnight.